So, Kamala Harris, otherwise known as Marmala Harris by the increasingly cringe Drew Barrymore.
We need you to be Mamala of the country.
Has been endorsed by Biden and also by others like Nancy Pelosi to run for president. First of all, who didn't see this coming? Her potentially replacing Biden was as predictable as a bad sitcom plot. And the second thing I'm going to say is this. To all my family and friends over there in the States, well, they might not need to hear this, but just in case, and for anyone else that may need to hear this or may need a reminder, your skin color, ethnic origin, or your gender identity aren't qualifications. They aren't talent, and they aren't your skills or expertise. That's the biggest issue with identity politics and obsession with labels. Many people lack substance today. That's a fact. So instead, they're out there parading their racial identity and gender identity as if these are factors alone that can substitute for character, competence, suitability for a role. That's why, what do we see? When they face rejection or failure, they often attribute these things and their lack of success to discrimination against their particular identity label. And they don't consider potential shortcomings in their qualifications or performance. Also, being a first in any category, whether it's the first woman, the first person of color, indigenous person, or any other demographic milestone, doesn't automatically entitle a person to a job, position, or opportunity. Breaking barriers is cool, is commendable, but it shouldn't be the sole criterion for excellence. What truly matters are an individual's results, work ethic, tangible achievements in their field. These are the things that are important. And the last thing I want to say is this. It's so interesting how Kamala's racial identity is being marketed in the political landscape. In a country where discussions about white privilege are prevalent and where it's often claimed that non-white people automatically face disadvantages, they're automatically at a disadvantage. What do we see? We see Kamala Harris's black identity being touted as an asset. That's why even though she is both black and Asian, right, of South Asian heritage, you'll always see the black part first. You'll always see it highlighted first. I don't remember what news article I was reading that said that her race and her gender will benefit her. This narrative does seem to contradict that often tired, repeated assertion that being a person of colour automatically puts you at a disadvantage. But will progressives and black activists keep playing pretend as if this isn't the case? Of course they will. Now let's talk about racist plants. So botanists have voted to change the name of more than 200 plants to remove a word associated with a racial slur. Following a 6-day session involving more than 100 researchers. Yes, that's 6 days, and yes, that's 100 researchers. It was agreed as part of the International Botanical Congress that all plant names containing the word Caffra would be replaced by the word Afra. The thing is, stuff like this for me is a little bit ridiculous. Where does it end? Are we going to start renaming everything that sounds even remotely offensive to someone somewhere? Also, what if these words that they replace with become slurs in the future? I mean, attitudes change, especially in our day and age. You know how fast things change these days. 1 minute something's fine, another minute is offensive. It's like walking on eggshells all the time. And, this is again more of that virtue signaling stuff that people use to make themselves feel good and sophisticated. Meanwhile, real problems are just piling up in some of their communities. How about seeing how to tackle poverty rates, reducing crime in certain neighborhoods, actually improving people's living standards, things that actually matter to real people. And then one might say, well, this stuff is important too because, if someone of color enters the botanist field and, they feel marginalized when they hear these terms. Okay, fine, fair enough. But, for them to actually enter these specialized fields in the first place, we have to address those issues I mentioned. These specific and formal names of plants mean nothing to the majority of people. I just think it's just so unnecessary. So the disappointment of England not winning the championship trophy at the Euros seems like a distant memory now. I get it, we live in a fast-paced world, one headline quickly replaces another, but it's so easy to forget the roller coaster of emotions we experienced just a short while ago. I remember it. I remember that anticipation leading up to that final on Sunday, and it was palpable. I feel like the Euros was a bit different this year. More people were definitely engaged in it, and it brought people together in a way that few events can nowadays. I remember that there were joint viewings at the pub after work and on weekends, office sweepstakes, spirited debates in household and workplaces, even among people who are not particularly invested in football. It was definitely a memorable tournament. But I'm not a sports writer and I'm not a sports commentator, so my attention was drawn to that recurring issue that transcends football. That persistent racialization of non-white players, even by those claiming to be anti-racist. I remember on social media, I saw photos of talented British players like Bellingham, Saka, circulating with captions such as, "Where are the racists now?" or "Are the racists out celebrating?" Apparently these posts were to challenge those who claimed that non-white people couldn't represent England, and I guess the aim was to apparently address the horrific abuse faced by players, especially those who missed penalties in past tournaments. But as usual, these people inadvertently shifted that focus back to skin colour rather than individual talent and skill. So they were mirroring the behaviour that they were trying or intending to combat. No reasonable person can deny that racism casts a shadow over momentous occasions in sports. However, during these players' moments of triumph, explicitly using their racial identity as some kind of a gotcha against racists was misguided and distasteful. The thing about racism is that it is dehumanizing in its nature. That's the core of it. It reduces individuals to mere representatives of a racial group rather than recognizing their unique identities and abilities. But ironically, some anti-racist mentality falls into the same trap. By continually emphasizing skin color, even in celebration, they continually ignore the human behind the achievement. And anti-racists should know better. They're the ones that claim to be the champions of minorities, the ones who uplift those who have been dehumanized in the past and present times, yet they engage in the exact same reductive behavior, and even worse, with statements such as, "Where are the racists now?" They make it about the racists and completely sideline the individuals that they're meant to be championing. But maybe I'm being naive, because it should be clear by now that anti-racists, they don't fight for the individual. They care about groups. In fact, those who profess to be individuals are often inconvenient to their cause. So I shouldn't be surprised that they are obsessed with race just as much as the racists are. One of the main strands of anti-racist thought is that white people are often unaware of their race, framing it as some kind of a privilege and sometimes even chastising and attacking white people for this apparent lack of awareness.
I am white, and part of being white is that I was not raised to see myself in racial terms. I understood that somebody had race, but not really me. To be white is to see oneself outside of race, to see oneself as a unique, special individual, exempt from the forces of socialization.
These theorists argue that while white people can remain oblivious to racial issues, black and brown people are denied this privilege because they are constantly being reminded of their racial identity. But of course, the irony is that most of the time, these reminders are coming from the anti-racists themselves. Anti-racists often use any opportunity to emphasize the racial identity of non-white people. As someone who has experienced this firsthand, I can attest to being reminded of my race when I've expressed thoughts or opinions that diverge from expected narratives. It's as if I was some kind of a mascot or a puppet, denied the autonomy to form my own conclusions based on my own individual experiences and reasoning. The ability to not fixate on race or to have it dominate your sense of self is a form of privilege. I completely agree. However, instead of attempting to strip this privilege from white people by heightening their race consciousness, a better idea would be to collectively work towards reducing the prominence of race in our daily discourse and interactions. So, for example, when 4 men perform exceptionally in a tournament, then that should be the main point. That should have been the tweet. Using their skin color to provoke and taunt ideological opponents cheapens the humanity of these people. They are reduced to tools or weapons to use against your enemies, dehumanizing them in the process. You know, I watched a video on Instagram of a Caribbean girl. She was talking about how different it was being black in Jamaica versus being black in the UK. And I've talked about this a lot of times, the difference between being black in Nigeria and being black in the UK. And she concluded it by saying, I had the privilege of not constantly having to think about the white man. In other words, I had the privilege to not constantly obsess and think about race.
I've never been more aware of my blackness until coming to America. Every little box I'm checking black or it's like it's never been that big a deal.
Like on applications.
Yes, all the time. Like somebody would compliment me, would say, "Oh my goodness, your hair is like that," and I say, "Oh, thank you so much." And then somebody would be like, "Yo, that was not a compliment." I was like, "Oh." My formative years are in Jamaica, so that's how it frames how I see the world. And as a Jamaican, I do understand that my lack of sensitivity sometimes comes across as ignorant, but it's just, I've had the privilege of not having to think about the white man every day.
How freeing is that? It is truly a luxury, and that's what people don't understand. It's a privilege. It's great to not have your race be made the center of your achievements, of your failures, even your whole existence. You know, and that's why I appeal to both the racists and the so-called anti-racists. Allow us all this luxury. Let us exist as individuals first, with our racial identities as just one facet of our complex selves, rather than the defining characteristic that overshadows all others. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. There was quite a bit discussed today, so I'd love to hear from you, your thoughts, your questions, your feedback, your criticism, everything. Just leave them all in the comments. And until next time, take care.